I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today we're getting our first drive in the new Volkswagen T-Roc in a rather unique environment. The T-Roc is still about 6-7 months off its sale date in Australia. We've come here to New Zealand where this little SUV has been on the market for some time to drive it here in a rather sort of winter wonderland outside Queenstown. Now, of course, this is the Southern Hemisphere. It's currently winter, but a very, very good chance to experience the 4Motion system in the T-Roc. Now, the first variant to arrive in Australia around March 2020 will be this one, the 140 TSI 4Motion, so 140 kilowatt turbocharged 2-litre petrol. Now, the T-Roc is basically the Golf SUV, and this won't be news to anybody watching in Europe where this car has been out for some time, but for Australians, it's going to be pretty unique to have a small Volkswagen SUV back on the market. It's going to be arriving around the same time as the new Mazda CX-30 as well, which is going to pose quite a challenge for those two cars to be competing head to head. That should be super interesting. But today, we're going to take a look around the T-Roc. What's the interior like? How practical is it? And then we'll head out on some of this icy stuff to see how it goes. Now, this particular T-Roc is kind of like a hybrid between European and New Zealand specifications, so it's a little different to the final version that we will receive in Australia, but we can take this as a pretty good guide to how the T-Roc will look and feel when it comes down under early 2020. This is also an R-Line, hence the really cool Suzuka alloy wheels outside, and this nice steering wheel, the R-Line wheel with the white stitching, just like a Golf R, pretty cool. But there are other aspects of this car that are a little different. So fabric seats, they may or may not come to Australia. I'd like them to, but I think they're more likely to revert to leather for our market or potentially be upgraded depending on your perspective. We've also got an active info display in this car that will come to Australia. Really cool, fully digital Mark II active info. A proper full screen map this time around, which is pretty awesome. Over here, we've got the 8-inch Discover Media system. That may or may not be the 9.2-inch Discover Pro in Australia, but we'll see. Could be bundled up with a high-end stereo like in the current Golf. Now, one thing that plenty of European commentators have already pointed out is that some of the material quality in the T-Roc is a little disappointing. There's more hard plastics in this car than in the Golf or really in any other current Volkswagen that I can think of, and that's a bit of a problem. Volkswagen Australia initially said that that would be changed for our market, but now they're saying those soft plastics will only be integrated at facelift time, so this is probably what we're going to get early next year. Whether or not that's good enough, you'll have to let me know down in the comments. However, the basic build quality of the thing is very good. Everything feels well screwed together, very tight. The doors have that real European thunk to them, which is cool. And it's also a really nicely well laid out, sort of sporty interior. You sit down into the car, you've got big cup holders, practicality wise, space for a wireless charger here, and big door bins, though, unlike most Volkswagens, they're not lined. Here in the back of the T-Roc, it's important to remember that this SUV will be sitting in the small class alongside cars like the Toyota CHR, Honda HR-V, stuff like the Skoda Karoq. It's bigger than this, and so as a result, the space is definitely compact. It's sufficient for two adults to sit back here. However, for myself at 6 foot, headroom's okay. Definitely okay, got a couple of inches to spare. Leg room, I'm pretty close to this seat in front of me, which I've adjusted into my driving position as if that was my seat. And tow room, no issue. Now, as for the center seat, it's a real perch. The transmission tunnel is very high to accommodate the 4Motion transaxle, so I'd keep it to 4 people back here. But while the materials like the front are hard, you do get amenities like air vents, which is very good for Australia, and also a flip down armrest with 2 cup holders. Around the back, I actually reckon the T-Roc looks really cool. It's kind of low but sleek and edgy, a little bit more coupe-ish than SUV-ish, if that's even a possible thing. You've got that spaced out badging like on the Touareg, and the cool pop-out latch like a Golf. Oh, it's an electric tailgate too. Who knew we needed that on small SUVs, but there you go. Really wide opening, very little boot lip, nice practical boot. Effectively similar to a Golf, maybe a touch bigger, but if you're after the SUV form factor, this one is nicely sized and nicely packaged. So what is the Volkswagen T-Roc like to drive? Well, if you've ever driven a Volkswagen or an Audi or a Skoda based on the MQB platform, then there's going to be a high degree of familiarity in this vehicle because the driving dynamics tend to be pretty similar across the MQB based product lines. But that's no bad thing, because these cars are engaging to drive, they're generally pretty comfortable and pretty refined, and so goes the T-Roc. In many ways, it feels like a shrunken Tiguan to me, not so much like a Golf that's been pumped up, just because the Golf is pretty old now. You know, it was launched in like 2012, so Volkswagen's had a lot of learnings since that point, and stuff like the steering feel is really different to the Golf, and more like a Tiguan. So quite light steering, but quite direct, and a really faithful and agile front end, which is really lovely. I also really like the size of this car. It's compact, it's easy to see out of, unlike a lot of cars in this segment, like the Toyota CHR. The shape of it is fairly conventional, and the glass house and mirrors are big, so you know, it's nice and easy to see out of and easy to maneuver. As for what's under the bonnet, the 140 kilowatt engine makes this thing feel more like a T-Roc GTI than, you know, kind of like a Bogo spec. And if it comes in around 40 grand, I can see that just about working. Honestly, I think this car, you know, it'll probably do a little better if Volkswagen managed to get in a cheaper variant closer to sort of the 30 grand mark. Only because there are elements of the car that feel definitely more 30 than 40 grand, like there's still, you know, this hard plastic inside, which will be the case until the T-Roc gets its facelift later on. But the 140 kilowatts a real sparkling engine. It sounds a little bit coarse, as sort of turbo 4-cylinder petrols are kind of doing these days, but it's got really good throttle response, heaps of torque, and it just pulls away really nicely. It feels properly quick. Now there will be a T-Roc R, but probably not for Australia at this point, unless it can be adapted for our sulfuric fuel, but probably not. So this is probably as quick as the T-Roc will get for the foreseeable future, and I think that it's definitely good enough for that use. As for stuff like fuel consumption, not really sure, because this kind of driving on ice and snow is certainly not representative of Sydney suburbs. But yeah, I really like the handling. I love the chassis, really short wheelbase. So on the slippery stuff, it just wants to rotate so nicely and beautifully. So if we just sort of take up the pace and really start to get into it, you know, it's super agile. It likes to rotate. You know exactly what it's doing. It's super faithful. You can get back on the power really nicely. Now we are on Pirelli Soto Zero winter tires here, so another element of spec which will be really different to the summer tires that are on this car in the Australian market. But you know, I think this thing is really tidy. It's well sized, it's good to drive, it's pretty quiet, pretty refined, and yeah, so it'll all be about its positioning in the market when it arrives in Australia. So those are my first impressions of the Volkswagen T-Roc. To be honest with you, it's hard to see this car going too wrong when it arrives in Australia around March next year. Of course, there's a big question around pricing. Volkswagen have kind of thrown out a suggestion of just under $40,000 for this pretty high spec all-wheel drive 140 kilowatt version. Later on, there may be two-wheel drive or lower end variants offered, but you know, the Volkswagen Golf in Australia, it's still a top 10 seller. It's a popular car, and I reckon the T-Roc could very well overtake it when it arrives on the Australian market, because we're only seeing the trend go one way with SUVs, and that is up, whether we like it or not. Now, if you haven't subscribed to Chasing Cars, please do so below the video and hit the notification bell so you never miss one of our full-length, highly detailed Australian video car reviews. And thanks for watching Chasing Cars.